Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today, in our 449th episode, we have an interview with Steve Brusatte. You're probably familiar with that name. We've interviewed him a couple times, and he's just sort of famous in his own right. And he's published a couple really popular books.
Yes.
Which you may have read. We also have Dinosaur of the Day, Claosaurus. We have 2 new dinosaurs to talk about.
Yep, we're catching up because they are adding up the new dinosaur discoveries.
That they are. And of course, we have a fun fact. But as always, before we get into our show, we always like to thank some patrons who are the driving force behind the show and make the show available for everybody. And this week we have 2 new patrons to thank. There's Ian, who's actually been a patron for a while, but we haven't been shouting out previously. And Reed, who just joined. Thank you both very much. And then rounding out our shout-outs, we've got Melina and Manoli, Gabe, Jeff, T-Bear, Christine, Cameron, Styjacosaurus, and Albertosaurus.
Yay, thank you so much for being a dino-it-all with us and being part of our community. Jumping into the news, I was going to say I get to start this one because I've got the exciting theropod, but there's 2 theropods we're talking about. Mine's a spinosaur.
They're both new.
Yep.
It's been a while since we jumped into the news with our little Prehistoric Planet miniseries.
True. Well, like I said, we've got a new spinosaurid, Protathlitis cinctorrensis. This was published in Scientific Reports by Andres Santos Cubedo and others, and it's open access if you want to check it out. It'll be in their show notes, the link. This was published back in May, but like Garrett said, we had our mini-season of Prehistoric Planet too, so we're getting to the dinosaurs now that have been named this year.
We got some catching up to do.
Yes. I mean, there was a lull in the beginning of the year.
It was like as soon as we decided to do the miniseries, there were a bunch of new dinosaurs named. We're like, of course.
So in addition to this Spinosaur being new and probably large, Protathlitis helps show that Spinosaurs originated in what is now Western Europe. So it's kind of adding to the puzzle there. It's a basal baryonychine, and it lived in the early Cretaceous about 127 to 126 million years ago. It was found in the Arcilla de Morea Formation in what is now Castellón, Spain. There's at least 11 valid spinosaurids. Some of them have been lumped over the years. I suspect that this number will continue to change, especially as we keep finding more spinosaurs, it seems.
As you said, they've been lumped over the years. I think of them in Iberia getting split. All these that used to just be called baryonyx are getting split out into their own genera.
That's a good point. Well, 5 spinosaurids are from Western Europe. They're a mix of Baryonychinae and Spinosaurinae, which are 2 subgroups of spinosaurids. And in Europe, spinosaurs are mostly found in Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom. Baryonychines, in case you're wondering, they're known for their serrated, slightly curved teeth, and Spinosaurines are known for their unserrated teeth and nostrils further back on the skull.
Interesting. I mean, I think some spinosaurs had serrated teeth, but maybe they're just not as serrated. Because the one and only fossil we have, which is a Spinosaurus tooth, allegedly, has a little bit of serrations on it.
Well, if you want to get all pedantic about it, yes, spinosaurs do have serrated teeth because baryonychines are a type of spinosaur.
Oh, yeah. But Spinosaurines
yeah.
have serrated teeth.
Protathlitis is the first baryonychine found in the Arcillas de Morea Formation. It lived at the same time as Vaibonavenatrix, which is the first Spinosaurine from the formation. And it lived next to a coastal zone, which makes sense. When we talk about spinosaurids, we often talk about being by a coast.
Swamps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that swamps again.
Eating fish, the occasional pterosaur.
Yeah. Now, most spinosaurid fossils found in what is now Spain are teeth. And yeah, there are a lot of spinosaur teeth out there. Like you said, we even have our own spinosaur tooth.
Yeah, ours is apparently from Morocco, even though we bought it at a museum in Japan. Although there have been spinosaur teeth found in Japan, there are spinosaur teeth from all over the place where we don't have any idea of what spinosaur they came from, just because they were dropping teeth like crazy, I guess, wherever they were.
And they got around.
Apparently, yeah. Yeah, there's a long distance between Japan and Europe even back then.
Yes. So Protathlitis, what they found was not just a tooth, there was a tooth, but also a right jawbone and 5 vertebrae. So the holotype is the jawbone and vertebrae, and then they referred, like a second specimen is the tooth.
Okay. So there weren't any teeth in the jawbone?
I think there were teeth in the jawbone.
That does help to connect it to an isolated tooth. Otherwise, how would you know that the isolated tooth counted?
That could be any old spinosaur tooth.
Mm-hmm.
The site where the fossils were found, that was discovered back in 1998, but it wasn't excavated until 2002. The jawbone is nearly complete. It's broken into 3 pieces that fit together. They estimate that Protathlitis had 41 or more tail vertebrae. There's a distinct feature in its jaw. If you want to get technical, it's a subcircular depression in the corner of the bone surface. And there's also unique details in the vertebrae, so that's how they know this is a new spinosaur that hasn't been found before. And it's estimated to be 10 to 11 meters long, or about 33 to 36 feet.
Oh, that's pretty big.
Yes. The type species is Protathlitis cinctorrensis, and the genus name means champion, but that's not necessarily what you might think it's related to.
It's not like T-Rex where it's the king.
No. So, according to the paper, the genus name champion refers to, quote, the UEFA Europa League title won by Villarreal CF in 2021, and as a tribute to the club centenary celebrated in 2023, end quote.
Yeah. I think someone posted this in our Discord with like an eye roll emoji for like they named it after a football club.
What's that Ted Lasso quote? Football is life.
Yeah, I guess that applies to some paleontologists too.
Yeah. Dinosaurs and football are life.
Yeah.
And the species name, cinctorrensis, refers to Cinctorris, which is the village where the fossils were found. Now, the authors suggested that based on this find, spinosaurids originated in Western Europe in the late Jurassic or early Cretaceous, and then migrated to Africa and Asia, and then diversified. There's a lot of different types of medium to large-sized spinosaurids found in Europe. In the Iberian Peninsula, spinosaurids are the most common theropods found in the early Cretaceous formations, and both baryonychines and spinosaurines have been found in different areas in Europe during the early Cretaceous. So after migrating, Europe, though, had more baryonychines, like Protathlitis, and Africa had spinosaurines like Spinosaurus.
I see.
Yep, so pretty cool find. I'm hoping that the more spinosaurids that are found, the more we can figure out just how aquatic they were.
Yeah, that would help. Although finding a little fragmentary jaw and a couple tail vertebrae isn't all that helpful.
Every bit helps.
I suppose it does. And this one was a spinosaurine out of the spinosaurine baryonychine?
No, it was a baryonychine.
Oh, okay. So the more expected one to find in Spain.
I don't know if it was more expected because in the early Cretaceous you had both groups. If it had lived later on, then it might be more expected.
Gotcha. Now I've got my new theropod to talk about. This one is much smaller than 33 feet long.
Is that why I went first?
Maybe. This one would be lucky if it reached 3 feet long. I don't even think it was that big.
Oh.
It's a...
Could it be a pet?
That's always your question.
Yeah.
Because probably not.
Yeah, theropods would be Well,
Birds.
People have birds as pets.
And they're theropods, yeah. But this one had teeth and claws, and I don't know. Seemed...
All comes down to how trainable it would have been.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, though. So getting into it, it's a new small theropod from Inner Mongolia, China. And as the researchers who were Wang Shiri and others who published this in Cretaceous Research said, quote, this theropod shows a peculiar combination of features in the hand, in part shared with therizinosaurids, oviraptorosaurs, and with the enigmatic Fukui venator Paradoxus from Japan, end quote.
Even just starting with therizinosaurids, I think, yeah, That must have a weird hand.
Yes. So it is extremely strange. Going into Fukui Venator, I need to do a little bit of an update on this because there was a study in 2021, which I don't think we talked about. It was by Soki Hattori and others. And what they did is they found that Fukui Venator is an early therizinosaur. Before that, it was a little bit more up in the air about where it fit, thus the paradoxus part for the species name. So this therizinosaur, Fukui Venator, didn't have remarkable claws like later Therizinosaurus with the largest claws of any animal that has ever lived. But it did have some subtle differences in other parts of its skeleton that look like they should identify it as a therizinosaur. So, for example, several of the neck vertebrae have a pair of small openings for air sacs or for weight savings, those pneumatic foramina. It also has characteristics of those other close relatives to therizinosaurs like oviraptorosaurs. So it's enigmatic in that way. They also found that Fukui Venator is most likely an omnivore with several features both in the herbivore and carnivore camp. So in the herbivore camp, they have 4 types of teeth, but none of them are serrated. Usually with carnivorous dinosaurs, we see serrated teeth.
Unless they're eating fish.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't think this one is presumed to be a fish eater.
That would just add to the mystery.
I guess it's possible. It also had extra neck vertebrae. I didn't realize this, but that is a correlation. If you have more neck vertebrae, you tend to be a plant eater with dinosaurs. I wonder just how much sauropods skew that, but they said it's also true with things like ornithopods.
Okay.
They also found some traits that correlated with carnivores. One of the types of teeth is curved and pointy, and despite the fact that it's not serrated, it still looks pretty carnivore-like.
Yeah, when it's curved, I tend to associate that with eating meat.
Yep, and it's sort of like pointed back towards the throat in that like ripping sort of orientation that we see in meat eaters. Unlike most herbivores, the teeth aren't closely packed together, and they're also not longer in the front, 2 things that you usually see in herbivores that this therizinosaur doesn't have. And Fukui Venator also had larger olfactory bulbs for better smell, although herbivores benefit from a good sense of smell too, which I'm going to get more into in the fun fact. That was a pretty fun Eryctodromius burrow. So when they combined all those details, they basically just figure it was an omnivore because, you've got some carnivore traits, some herbivore traits. Maybe it was an omnivore.
Yep, why not both?
Yep. And it makes sense because we know that therizinosaurs are theropods and they had carnivorous ancestors. So it's pretty reasonable that the early therizinosaurs would be omnivores before their descendants eventually evolved obligate herbivory and completely cut the meat out of their diet. Or at least mostly cut the meat out of the diet. Because we know herbivores occasionally eat meat too. So back to the new dinosaur. It's named Migmanychion. Comes from, quote, Greek words megma and nichon for claw mixture in reference to the marked heterogeneity in size and shape of the 3 manual unguals, end quote.
So it's 3 claws that all look different.
Yes, exactly. So in the way that I was talking about Fukui Venator having teeth that were all over the map, this Migmanychion has claws that are all over the place in terms of how they look.
Yeah, therizinosaurs, oviraptors.
Yeah, so super weird. And then the species name, laiyang, is because the holotype is housed at the Shandong Laiyang Cretaceous National Geological Park. Although it's in a pre-proof, and I kind of wonder if they're going to add an I or is or us to the end to Latin it up a little bit. Make it laiyangi or laiyangus, because that's often how you do species names.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. They didn't find that much.
But they found the claws, I'm guessing.
Yes. They found a complete articulated hand, including those impressive claws. The holotype also includes some ribs and the end of the arm. There's also another specimen with part of the hips and legs, but we can't tell if it's the same animal or not, so they didn't include it in the holotype. Migmanychion is a small animal, like we were saying, but its claws are still pretty big. So one claw is about 24.9 millimeters, or I could just say it is exactly 24.9 millimeters long.
Yeah, millimeters are pretty exact.
Yeah, which is almost exactly an inch, but that's without the keratin sheath, which would have made it significantly longer. So over an inch long claw is still pretty decent. It's not like a little Microraptor or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Another one of the claws is about 18.5 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch long. And they both look really sharp in the photos. And obviously with the keratin covering too, they could stay or get even sharper. It was small, although not super tiny. For comparison, a velociraptor claw is about twice as long as Migmanychion. And just for fun, Therizinosaurus had claws that were about 30 times as long.
Ooh.
Maybe 40 times.
Wow.
So it had a way to go to get to the size of the later descendants. Its closest relative in their analysis was Fuquivenator, probably because it also has a weird combination of features, but also it's possible that it was a weird Oviraptorosaur with some Therizinosaur traits, and it could also be another paravian group altogether that has some Oviraptorosaur and Therizinosaur traits. It's just really hard to tell when we only have the hand.
Mm-hmm.
One of the little details, for example, is that the radius is a lot thinner than the ulna, which is something that Microraptor has going on.
All right.
So it's just sort of very weird. Migmanychion was found in the Pigeon Hill locality, and they dated this fossil to right about 121 million years ago, which is in the early Cretaceous. And that also puts it at the tail end of the nearby Jehol biota. This fossil could probably be considered part of the Jehol biota because there are some overlapping fossils in Pigeon Hill as the Jehol biota, but it's a little bit far away from where people are usually talking about that. It's not usually in Inner Mongolia. It's usually a little bit to the east and south where we're talking about Jehol biota, but maybe it'll get lumped in the future and sort of expand, sort of like with Hell Creek, how it just keeps getting bigger as we find fossils from other places.
Could be.
So that's our new Therizinosaur, potentially.
I like
Early
it.
Therizinosaur. Yeah. I love Therizinosaurs so much.
Yeah, they're so weird.
And I'd love to know more about the early ones that might have been omnivores and just how...
How did they make that switch?
Yeah. And like, what were they? I'm guessing it was probably like insects or small vertebrates along with plants to start, because that's been the proposed usual progression. But they were so weird. It'd be fun if they did something totally different. Like they were just, pack hunting and then one day started eating plants on the side. And now we're going to pause for a quick sponsor break, but when we get back, we'll get into our interview with Steve Brusatte. And now on to our interview with Steve Brusatte, but of course, as always, we have an extended version of this interview. So if you'd like to hear more details about how one might survive in the dinosaur times, then be sure to check that out in your premium content feed if you're a patron, or if you're not, consider joining and listening to it then.
We're here this week with Steve Brusatte, a paleontologist, paleontology advisor for Jurassic World, and author of a number of paleontology books. He's also the expert reviewer for a new National Geographic Kids book by Stephanie Warren Drimmer called How to Survive in the Age of Dinosaurs. So thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Garrett and Sabrina, it's always a pleasure to talk to the two of you, and I always love it when we have an occasion to chat, and this new Nat Geo book is a good one to talk about. And I'll just say I played a very small role. All props to Stephanie Drimmer, who's a fantastic children's writer. She's written about all kinds of subjects, and she mastered dinosaurs to write this book.
Yeah, it was a really entertaining read. And I liked all the, they were kind of like quizzes or flow charts of, like how would you survive if a volcano is erupting? What do you do? That kind of thing.
Yep, it's like a choose your own adventure thing, almost, those books that a lot of us had as kids. It's not quite that, but you get a little bit of that mindset of putting yourself into these scenarios and thinking about if you were there 100+ million years ago and you had to stare down a volcano, or if you were there 66 million years ago and a T-Rex was approaching you, what would you do? And I think this is a way to bring this information on dinosaurs to people, especially to kids, in a fun and an imaginative way.
Definitely. These are a lot of, maybe not all the situations, but some of the situations you could see, like if you're out in a place, you want to stay hydrated and don't use up too much energy, or sleep in a tree to stay away from predators, that kind of thing.
Yep, I think all good advice. I think a lot of it is kind of common sense advice, let's face it, that works in today's world too. If you're in the desert, drink your water. If there's something big and scary around and you have to go to sleep when you're very vulnerable, get it to a place where maybe that big scary thing can't easily reach you. So go up and sleep in a tree, which, by the way, is probably what our human ancestors did in Africa when the first humans were evolving. This was a scary world of lions and all kinds of big scary creatures out there, and our ape ancestors probably did still spend a lot of time in the trees and sleep in the trees. And so some of these things are things we've had to do in our own evolutionary paths in order to survive.
Definitely. Do you have any favorite survival tips from the book?
One of the things I love talking about whenever I talk about dinosaurs, especially to kids, is these mega monsoons, these huge storms that ravaged the supercontinent of Pangaea back in the Triassic period. So this was the time when the first dinosaurs were living. The first dinosaurs, about 230 million years ago, is when they lived. And they were small, they were humble. They were the size of dogs up to the size of humans. They didn't get much bigger for a while. T-Rexes, Brontosauruses, those things came much later. And so these dinosaurs, they lived in a capricious world, and that supercontinent, it was a single landmass that stretched from North Pole to South Pole, surrounded by a single global ocean. But it was a tough place to live. There were vast deserts across much of that supercontinent, and parts of it were just pummeled by these mega monsoons, monsoon storms far out of scale to anything humans have witnessed. And we know how bad the monsoons can be. You see in the news when there's a monsoon, often in Southeast Asia, and there can be a lot of destruction, and there can sadly be a lot of injuries, a lot of death. And these monsoons that the first dinosaurs had to deal with were even more extreme. I don't really know if there would have been a good survival tip, frankly, to get through them, but move far inland, get away from the coast where the flooding would have been worse. Try to seek shelter in an area that's elevated. So if there's a flood, some of those common sense things, but by and large, those would have been pretty apocalyptic storms. And the thing is, it's not just made up. There's evidence in the geological record that there were these very big storms, the marks they left behind in the rocks, and also just the climate. The different climates, different temperatures cause different types of isotopes of different elements to be preserved in the rocks. And you can use that and put that into computer models. And all this shows that these storms were real. They're not just something that's made up, in some film or something like that. So to me, the very term, a mega monsoon, it says something. It packs a punch, just the word.
Yeah, that's hard enough in today's environment when we have houses and there aren't things trying to eat us, and we have all of the modern conveniences.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, I know when you were talking about, I don't know if there was a way to survive that or, to get away from it. I was thinking we had a listener at one point ask, what would be the hardest time to survive? And one of the things I found that would be really difficult was the level of concentration of carbon dioxide, because there were periods where that was higher, and that can do some weird stuff to a human body.
Yes. And that's another thing, right? This book, How to Survive in the Age of Dinosaurs. It's fun. It's a little bit quirky, very educational. Kids are going to, I think, enjoy it. But I do think that when most people pick up this book, they're going to think, oh, how do you survive a T-Rex attack? How do you survive a pack of velociraptors? We cover that in the book. But it's not just that. It's how to survive in the age of dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
There were all kinds of other animals around then, too. The big marine reptiles in the ocean. There were all kinds of freakish insects. There were early relatives of us, little mammals. So you would have had to survive these things, deal with those things. And then, of course, there's just the physical environment. The world was different back then. The atmosphere was different. The temperature was different. And you're absolutely right. There was a lot more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere back then. The world was generally much warmer. For most of the Age of Dinosaurs, there were no ice caps at the poles. There were no big glaciers. Maybe glaciers would have just been restricted to the tallest mountains. It was a very different hothouse world compared to the world we live in today. Now, of course, we're concerned about carbon dioxide today not because there's an absolutely huge amount of it in the atmosphere. It's just that it's rising so quickly. That's the problem today. there was a lot more carbon dioxide during the time of dinosaurs. What that means is that probably that atmosphere would have been more difficult for us to breathe. There are stories where, humans get carbon dioxide poisoning. If you get too much in your blood, one way or another, that can kill you. There's episodes where animals, livestock, there's a famous case in Africa, I believe, where there was like a herd of cattle that was near a lake, and that lake, there was, very oxygen poor bottom waters of that lake with a lot of carbon dioxide in it. And then that lake turned over. Something triggered, the water to kind of turn over. And all this carbon dioxide was released. And all these animals, this herd of cattle and others around it, died because there was so much carbon dioxide. Those would be the kind of things that we would have to be concerned about if we were breathing in that atmosphere back then. And it's stuff like that, I think that explaining this to kids in a fun way, articulating it shows that it's not just the dinosaurs, it's the entire world. And I hope that it gives some appreciation for how the whole Earth works and for our Earth today. Because when we talk about things like carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, obviously it's relevant to what's happening in the world today. And hopefully these thought experiments, this imagination of kids thinking about this stuff, does draw some links to the modern world for them.
Definitely, especially when you have the dinosaurs sprinkled throughout, and you get like a good mix of everything. And I had wanted to caught some of the fun. Well, maybe it'd probably be scary if it was happening to you, but like survival tips. Like there was one, watch out for sauropods stampeding, and one of the tips was, duck and cover, but also you could just lie down, and you hope for the best.
Hope for the best.
But I didn't.
For the best.
Yeah, I would never have thought about that. I think there was a note about elephants. If they're stampeding, they don't want to be stepping on small things.
Yeah. I mean, just think about it. I mean, if we're running somewhere, we don't want to step on rocks and sticks and so on. We want to clear a path. So it makes complete sense that elephants behave the same way in the modern world. And that sauropods probably would have too, even though these were huge animals. They wouldn't have wanted to discomfort themselves by stepping on stuff. And that would pose a danger, right? If you're stepping on stuff, you could break an ankle. You could, even just something as simple as stubbing your toe. It's not catastrophic. Why do you want to? So of course you're going to avoid stomping on things. And I think we probably do get that image that these sauropods were so big, they shook the earth as they walked, that they would just flatten you. Like some bulldozer just running you down. But no, I'm sure they would have tried. If they could see you, they would probably try to avoid you. Still, though, I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere near the hands and feet of a sauropod, because some of these things were heavier than jet airplanes, and I would not want that force on myself.
Yeah, that's a good point. We always talk about, or I joke with Sabrina because she loves sauropods, that sauropods were always just like squishing the poor innocent little animals around them. Yeah. But that's a good point, because like a sauropod's foot really isn't that big, because proportionally, it's like a hoof practically in terms of scale. And so if you have it stepping on a human curled up in a ball, that's like us stepping on something that's the size of our foot. And like you said, that's a risky thing to do. So it makes sense that they would avoid that.
Yeah, totally. And these sauropods, like all dinosaurs, walked on their toes. They weren't like us that walked on the palm of their hand or the arch of the foot. They walked on their toes, and they had pads, of course, of cartilage and fat and skin and stuff that helped support those toes. But they had a lot more soft tissue down there that really could have been injured. And we know even with our feet, they're very prone to injury. Small little things can cause, injuries with the tendons or the ligaments. They can be incredibly painful. You see all these athletes that, have to sit out for months and months because of some little foot injury. I think it's just the foot. So anyway, the point is, I do think that these sauropods, you wouldn't have wanted to be near them, but really by and large, you're right. Their feet were not huge. Their feet were not built for just playing whack-a-mole to squash everything in their way. So, they were animals. And I hope that with the book and thinking about these things and putting kids in the world of the dinosaurs, that it also helps convey the reality that these were real animals. Mm-hmm. These things weren't monsters. They weren't dragons. They were something out of a fantasy book. They were real animals that had to abide by the laws of nature. And of course, they didn't have superpowers. They would have had to grow up and, hatch and grow up and eat food and escape predators and not injure themselves and do all the things that normal animals have to do today.
Definitely. That reminds me of another tip where if you buy a pterosaur, hopefully you have some food that you can distract it with.
I think for pterosaurs, think of gulls, seagulls, seagulls. But, I kind of think like here, at least in Edinburgh, here in Scotland, where I live, we're very close to the water. The North Sea is not very far away. We're just right off an inlet of the North Sea called the Firth of Forth. And there are so many gulls. There's nesting colonies of gulls. They are nasty. They are so nasty that in my university, they actually fly around Harris hawks to scare the gulls away. There's pest control, and that pest control is not setting little traps, but it's sending out hawks to fly around the university. So I will see these sometimes. That's how nasty gulls are. We don't want them around because they'll dive bomb you. If you're eating anything, they'll try and steal it.
That's happened to me.
Well, yeah, my wife today, I was just chatting with her. Her and our little boy were out at the botanical gardens. There's a beautiful botanical gardens here in Edinburgh. And they were at the little cafe, and somebody next to them was eating a croissant, and a gull came down and snatched it.
Oh, no.
So, they're dinosaurs, of course, and I say this, I joke about this a lot of times when I give talks and I talk about birds being dinosaurs. I say when you confront a seagull and sense the inner velociraptor in it, it's so nasty. Yeah. But anyway, the point is for pterosaurs, I think a lot of these pterosaurs probably would have behaved like really big seagulls. They would have been ferocious. I would not have wanted to be anywhere near them. So yes, if you had some food, something to distract them, that would probably be in your best interest.
Yeah, because even though they're not dinosaurs, pterosaurs, they're close relatives. So they,
Well, going back to other ways that this book ties into and how you can see it tie into even today, I liked how there were tips on what to eat in the different periods. And all of these things are things that we could eat today, like yes, bugs, insects. We could eat insects today. Oh, yeah. Then there's like shellfish and eggs. And those were the main ones I'm remembering right now.
Yes, I think one of the things that strikes me is how difficult it would have been to be a vegetarian.
Yes.
For much in the Age of Dinosaurs.
Or if you had allergies.
In the Jurassic, or if you had allergies. Let's say you're in the Jurassic period, about 150 million years ago. This was the time of Brontosaurus, Brachiosaurus. Allosaurus was at the top of the food chain. Stegosaurus was there, also a plant eater. Those dinosaurs would have never seen a fruit or a flower. Flowering plants had not evolved yet. So if you were plonked back in the Jurassic, there would have been no fruit, no vegetables. There would have been no cereal grains, wheat, corn, oats. All of those things are grasses, which are a type of flowering plant. So almost all the plant-based products we eat that either we've domesticated or stuff we get from nature are from flowering plants. Now, you could eat pine nuts, that kind of stuff. There would be some stuff to eat. But we're talking about, this is a time of evergreen trees, of ferns, of cycads, of ginkgos. So there's stuff to eat with those plants, but it would not have been anywhere near the variety of fruits and vegetables and other plant-based stuff today. So I think it would have been hugely hard for a human to be a vegetarian in that age. There were plenty of dinosaurs, of course, that adapted to that world and to eat those kind of plants. So humans would have to find a way to do the same.
Yeah. I'm imagining when they talk about Inupiat and people that live in places where there's no access to food, what do? They have to find a blubber that contains the right vitamins or something. So it would be, what kind of animal are you eating today?
There you go. You'd be subsisting on sauropod blubber, if you were in the Jurassic. Why not?
I don't know how easy it would be to get to that. I'm sure other animals want that blubber.
Yeah.
I think that would be a very sought after source of deliciousness in the Jurassic, a bunch of Brontosaurus blubber. Sounds like some out of the Flintstones.
It does. Yeah, that's true, because in the Arctic, you have the added benefit of there's refrigeration everywhere. So you could kill a whale and then you'd have it for months. that doesn't work in the Mesozoic.
That does not work. No, there's no way to put that that Brontosaurus blubber, Brontosaurus burger, and on ice. No way to put it in the freezer for a while. Nope, you'd have to eat it soon.
Well, I like too that the mammals pop up throughout the book and remind us, like, yes, we were there. Well, not us, but our ancestors.
Gosh, our ancestors there. Yes, and that's something. And I know we spoke about mammals last time, about my now not so new but newish book, the Rise and Reign of the Mammals. When we talked at SVP about that, and for me, I mean, dinosaurs are my first love. They're what I've mostly studied as a scientist, but I'm doing more and more on mammals, and they continue to fascinate me and to thrill me the more I learn about them. And it is just on the face of it, it's fascinating to think that we had ancestors that lived with the dinosaurs. We had mammalian ancestors that had to survive in the age of dinosaurs. The asteroid hits, T-Rex and Triceratops are gone, and these mammals, they just took advantage. Within 200,000 years, you got mammals the size of pigs. 1 million years, mammals the size of cows. These mammals, they were just waiting, and then when that opportunity came, they took it immediately.
That's true. And then you think of the whales, giant whales.
Yep. Yeah, even surpassing sauropods.
Yeah.
One-upped them.
One-upped them. I mean, mammals have gotten much bigger than any dinosaur ever did, which is also an astounding thing. And astounding that's the biggest mammals ever, the biggest animals ever. Blue whales are alive right now. As we talk, they are swimming, cruising through the ocean. I think that is something we should cherish more than we do.
Yeah, I agree. I think about that sometimes, how we think about dinosaurs all the time and how, it's unfortunate we'll never get to see these things. But there are some really cool things alive today that weren't around in the Mesozoic. So yeah, appreciating those is a good point.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm totally on board there. And I think studying dinosaurs, seeing how we fawn over Brachiosaurus and T-Rex and how iconic they are, how we hold them in such esteem, in large part because of their huge size. I think that if some of these giant mammals, particularly whales, were also extinct, we would feel the same. We would find them so fascinating. We would say, if we could only have seen them alive, if we could only have gone whale watching, it would have been majestic. Well, we still can. And let's keep it that way.
Yep.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today. And for our listeners, the book is How to Survive in the Age of Dinosaurs. It's technically a kid's book, but adults can also enjoy it. And there's a lot to learn from.
Yes, I think we can all say, the three of us, I think, as parents of young children, there's a lot in there for young kids. Maybe not for super young kids, but for like my son's 3.5, it's getting to the point where I could read him some of this and he can start to imagine. So it has not just the Nat Geo seal of approval, not just the scientist seal of approval, but I'm giving it the parent seal of approval.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Well, yes, thank you again.
Thank you. Yes, always a pleasure.
Thanks again, Steve. It's always fun to chat with you. And we'll keep an eye out. We're looking forward to your many future projects. Before we get into our dinosaur of the day, we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. But then we'll talk about Claosaurus. And now on to our dinosaur of the day, Claosaurus, which was a request from PaleoMike716 via our Patreon and Discord. So thanks. We talked about it briefly in episode 350 as part of our Hadrosaur Hootenanny.
Oh, there were a lot of Hadrosaurs in that Hootenanny.
Yes, so it was just very brief. We can expand here a little bit. It was a Hadrosauroid that lived in the Late Cretaceous in what is now Kansas in the U.S. in the Niobrara Formation. It probably looked somewhat similar to Edmontosaurus, and, being a hadrosaur, it had that duck bill. It also had a long tail. It was an herbivore. It probably walked on 2 legs and then stood on all 4s to graze food. It's hard to know how big it was because there's not that many fossils that have been found, but Tom Holtz estimated it to be about 12 feet or 3.7 meters long.
That was a little guy, especially compared to Edmontosaurus.
Yes. Originally, it was named by Marsh in 1872 as Hadrosaurus agilis, but then in 1890, it got renamed to Claosaurus agilis because it was just found to be too different from Hadrosaurus. So the type species is Claosaurus agilis, and the genus name means broken lizard. That refers to the way the fossils were found.
Oh, what?
Not anything to do with the dinosaur itself.
They found some broken fossils and they said, we'll just name it Broken Lizard.
Yeah. Or Claosaurus.
They were naming a lot of dinosaurs, I guess.
Running out of ideas.
Yeah.
So like I said, it was found in Kansas in the U.S. It's likely that the specimen died on shore and then got washed out to sea. They found parts of the skull and an articulated skeleton. Marsh wrote, quote, "The skull of Claosaurus is long and narrow, with the facial portion especially produced." And he also wrote that, quote, "The skull shows a blunt, rugose muzzle."
Muzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Not a word you see associated with dinosaurs that often, but it kind of fits with the duckbill head shape.
Yeah. So a lot of the bones that were found were crushed and flattened, also known as broken, I guess.
Famously broken.
Yeah. So the fossils found include vertebrae, parts of the chest and shoulder, parts of the arms, parts of the pelvis, parts of the legs, and parts of the feet. There were in the past 2 other Claosaurus species, but those are no longer considered to be valid. Marsh named Claosaurus annectens in 1892 based on 2 skeletons found in the Lance Formation. Later, that Claosaurus annectens became Anatosaurus and then eventually became Edmontosaurus.
I was going to say, I know Edmontosaurus annectens.
Mm-hmm.
It's a popular one.
And then in 1903, G.R. Weiland named Claosaurus affinis based on 3 toe bones found in the Pierre Shale in South Dakota that was found along with fossils from a giant sea turtle. But those fossils got mixed up with Claosaurus agilis. So now we've just got Claosaurus agilis. In 1948, Joseph Gregory found 3 toe bones similar in size in the Yale collections that looked like it came from the Pierre Shale, but didn't assign he didn't reassign the species. It was older in age and too fragmentary. In 2004, Jack Horner and others found Claosaurus affinis to be dubious. In 1940, Claosaurus was described partially by its broad, leaf-like teeth. Walter Combs Jr. in 1988 said Claosaurus should be redefined based on something other than teeth characteristics. I don't think he's the only one to have said that.
Yeah. It's nice when you can include something other than just teeth.
Mm-hmm. In 2011, when Albert Prieto Marquez found Hadrosauros to be a valid dinosaur, he also found Claosaurus agilis to be valid. And what makes Claosaurus unique is that the length of its deltopectoral crest, a ridge on the front of its upper arm, is less than 48% the length of the humerus, as well as there's certain details in the ilium, part of the pelvis.
So I guess if you're only looking at the teeth, you might not have anything unique.
Mm-hmm.
But if you include other parts of the animal, then you could find unique things. So it might kind of boil down to what you consider Claosaurus versus not officially Claosaurus holotype.
Yes, but these days we consider it to be official.
Okay.
Gastroliths have been thought to be found in Claosaurus, but it turned out to most likely be gravel that washed in after the individual died.
That's disappointing.
Yeah, gastroliths can be tricky sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially since it's just like they swallow a rock. Well, did they swallow that rock, or was that rock just in the rock near it?
Hard to say sometimes. But it also turns out that Claosaurus individual with the not gastroliths was actually an Edmontosaurus specimen. But when Barnum Brown found the specimen, this is in 1900, Edmontosaurus was considered to be Claosaurus.
Yeah. That happens a lot if you don't know the whole story. You end up in these traps of like, oh, the unique thing about this animal is blank, but really it got redefined and it's totally different.
Yes. That's why it's important to read the literature, all those scientific papers, but sometimes there's a lot of them for a particular dinosaur.
Good job, Sabrina.
Oh, thanks.
And our fun fact of the day is that a good sense of smell would have been very useful for herbivorous dinosaurs and not just those that spent their time hunting and or scavenging. I got into this with the new theropod and the fact that like, oh, it's got a good sense of smell. Maybe that
can it sniff out danger?
That's one of the many things. So first, when I think of sense of smell and what it's most useful for whatever reason, I always think of vultures first. I think of scavenging is like where my head goes to.
The most pungent smells.
I think that's why, right? Because it's like if you could smell something rotting from really far away, or like sharks, smelling a little blood in the water from like a far distance, it's still like something's already injured and you're like coming in to take advantage.
I think, oh, maybe these flowers smell nice, or a nicely cooked meal, or...
But you wouldn't evolve to smell flowers. But I guess you would have evolved to smell meals. Maybe not cooked, but yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a study by Nathan Grigg and others in Scientific Reports looking at the sense of smell in turkey vultures. And turkey vultures are New World vultures. They're pretty ubiquitous in the Americas outside of northern Canada and Alaska. Otherwise, they're all over southern Canada, the rest of North America, and they go all the way down to the tip of Argentina and Chile, just way down south. They're everywhere. It's actually the only vulture that I've ever identified in the wild.
Oh, good job.
Although I'm a very novice birder. I've probably seen other vultures, but they really stand out because they have black plumage and red heads.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen them a few times because it's like, oh, that's a turkey vulture.
They're the kind that I think appear in Looney Tunes.
Could be, yeah. They're like the most widespread of the vultures. And they tend to be solo too, which kind of makes them stand out sometimes. So turkey vultures have a good chunk of their brain dedicated to smell. And according to the study, they found that turkey vultures have 4 times the olfactory bulb size than their close relative, the black vulture, even though overall the turkey vulture has a smaller brain.
All right. So it's very important to sniff out its food.
Yeah. Turkey vultures actually have the largest known olfactory bulbs of any bird, period. And they said, quote, "We suggest that this sensitive sense of smell allowed the turkey vulture to colonize biomes that are suboptimal for scavenging birds and become the most widespread vulture species in the world," end quote.
So it worked out for them.
It did, yes. And it seems like that smell is really helping them get all over the place. Although, even though turkey vultures can smell really well, and it made them very successful, most vultures, especially old world vultures, meaning those in the Americas, the rest of the world,
Europe,
and Asia and Africa, I think maybe Australia. I'm not positive about where they fit in the scheme of new and old world, but they rely on sight more than smell to find food. In fact, they almost exclusively use their sight. So they like fly around, they'll look for other animals going towards something, or they'll try to identify carrion directly by flying and looking rather than smelling.
So if they see a bunch of flies around.
Yeah, or maybe a larger animal that's easier to see from a distance.
If you got enough flies swarming, you might be able to tell.
I think they said like groups of animals going around something that looks like something's already dead.
That makes sense.
I guess technically a bunch of flies is a group of animals, but I think from the sky it might be easier to like spot some hyenas or something.
Probably. Something bigger.
Yeah. So you definitely don't need smell to scavenge. But on the other hand, elephants also have a really good sense of smell. There's a study by Melissa Schmidt and others published in Animal Behavior that put them to a test. So they put elephants in a simple maze. It's called a Y maze. So they go in the middle and then there's 2 things off to the side, but you can't see either of them. So you have to rely on your smell or sound to identify what it is. What they did is they put the elephant in this maze, and the elephants could easily tell from 7 meters or 23 feet away which way they wanted to go.
Wow.
And they always went directly to the plants that they preferred to eat. The really cool thing about it is these plants have almost no aroma to them. They like have very little smell. And then the one that they put on the other side was a closely related plant that smelled really similar. So they gave them 2 options. Both of them don't smell very much, and they smell similar, and they still could always tell from 23 feet away which way to go. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So I was trying to think of an analogy. I think the best analogy is it's like if you were standing in a hallway with multiple rooms and you could tell which room had your favorite type of lettuce in it just by smell without like seeing it or getting that close to the doorways. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
For an elephant, this is really useful because it can mean that they can decide if turning over a log or pushing down a tree to get it leaves near the top is worth the effort. Because obviously, if these are big, heavy things, you don't want to just be turning over logs and knocking down trees just to maybe get something you like to eat. But if you can smell and say like, ooh, yeah, that smells good.
It's worth burning through that energy.
Yeah, exactly. So like vultures, elephants have large olfactory bulbs for decoding smell. In fact, elephants have the largest olfactory bulbs of any mammal. And given that elephants have huge ears, another hypothesis had been that they could hear differences between food options. Because, like differences in the way they crunch or maybe the way they're moving in the breeze or something might clue them in. So a different team of researchers tested elephants with audio-only clues, but the elephants couldn't tell the difference between types of food by their sound. They needed that smell. And then if you gave them a little bit of that smell, they were going for it. Smell is definitely useful for hunting at night. We talk about this all the time. So recently we were talking about the troodontid Stenonychosaurus, how it used its smell for hunting at night. It's also true probably for tyrannosaurs and raptors. They all seem to have a good sense of smell. But it's not just the carnivorous dinosaurs that have a good sense of smell. Pascaline Louders and others in progress in brain research determined that ornithopods like hadrosaurs had a good sense of smell as well. They weren't hunting anything, so probably more in the elephant camp.
Unless they're trying to sniff out a good tree?
So you're saying they're hunting a tree?
I don't know if you can hunt something that's stationary, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah, well, they're looking for plants with their nose, presumably.
Yeah.
The redescription of Ankylosaurus by Victoria Arbour also determined that Ankylosaurus had a good sense of smell, and so did the Therizinosaur Erlikosaurus, and probably most other therizinosaurs.
Used their sense of smell to guide their large claws to do whatever it was their claws were doing.
You're coming up with all sorts of weird ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that works if you're going with the original hypothesis that they use their claws to sort of grab at branches.
Right, except we know that Therizinosaurus' claws were too large to even do that, so.
Well, I don't know. I feel like they could probably do a little bit. And that was just Therizinosaurus,
Yes.
not all Therizinosaurs.
True.
But being able to smell things in general, if you're looking for food, means less time and energy wasted looking for that food, regardless of if the food is a plant or an animal. Elephants can supposedly smell water too. Multiple sources say they can smell water from 12 miles or 19 kilometers away, but I couldn't find any peer-reviewed source for that claim, so I'm a little bit skeptical that that's actually a real thing that they can do. Especially considering they can hear really well. You can also hear water, so that might be how they find it. It's kind of hard to put elephant in a blinded experiment to find water from 12 miles away, though.
Yeah.
You got to get an area with no water for like 20 miles and then play a sound of water 12 miles away and see if they find it versus make the smell of water somehow without the sound from 12 miles away. It's a tricky experiment to do. Two more things elephant can smell that I just ran into while doing this research is they can smell landmines.
Oh, that's useful.
It is, although they might not know that it's a landmine, like that it's dangerous.
Oh, so they still might accidentally step on it.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
But if they could be trained to smell them, and some animals are taught to smell explosives to identify and find out the explosives. So elephants are one of the animals that could pull that off. But the coolest, craziest thing is that they can smell different tribes of people. So elephants have been hunted by one tribe of people for a long time, and they can smell that tribe and avoid them, where other nearby tribes they don't avoid because they can smell the difference between the tribes.
That's very useful.
Yeah.
I wonder how far away they can smell people.
They got a really good sense of smell. So probably if they can smell the difference between two types of plant from 20 feet away, they could probably smell a human from a pretty long distance.
That's true.
I mean, like deer, when you're hunting deer, you have to cover up your scent or try to stay downwind because they can smell you. And elephants have a way better sense of smell than deer. So
good point.
So in addition to finding food, smell is also good for navigating, detecting predators, finding mates, detecting hazards like poison or fire, marking or detecting territories, identifying individuals like family members, and other really cool stuff.
I think those are all things that humans do.
Yeah. The only difference between carnivores and herbivores is that carnivores eat a different type of food. So yes, it is useful for them to find their food, just like it is for herbivores, but it doesn't mean that they're the only ones that can use smell.
It's a good sense to have.
It is, yeah. Just like sight. It's not just carnivores that have good sight.
Don't forget the omnivores.
It's true. Which is really most animals anyway.
Well, that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned because next week is another milestone episode for us, 450. Can you believe we've made it to 450, Garrett?
That's a lot of episodes.
Yeah. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with some beaky dinosaurs.
Beaky, huh?
Well, I don't want to give it away too much. Also, it's kind of surprising when I was doing this research that it's the beak that defines this particular group of dinosaurs, which is not what you might guess. So yeah, stay tuned for that for next week.
We're not just doing birds with beaks, right?
No, birds are for the April Fools episodes.
Okay. It's a non-avian dinosaur with a special beak.
But it was something that a few of our patrons requested. So yes. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoy listening to episodes of I Know Dino in general, then please tell a friend. Sharing is caring.
Yeah, in addition to our Patreon, just telling people about our show is extremely helpful.
Yes. Thanks again, and until next time.
Good day.